Good afternoon, class. Today what we are going to demonstrate is how to create a figure painting using the side size method. I will elaborate more on the palette and setting up later on. Right now we're just going to focus on actually the method and the theory behind side size using a paintbrush as opposed to using a pencil. I've set up the master copy and then the copy that I'm going to work from, which has already been broken down. This is what you're going to be doing in class. So you're going to have a packet. That packet is going to consist of all the assignments that we're going to do throughout the semester. So at the beginning, the figures have been broken down into more or less simple geometry in order to facilitate the method. So you have to be able to see the complex image, in this case a figure, this subject, and be able to break it down into manageable lines and simple geometry. The reason why we want to do this is that we want to have as much flexibility as possible. So it's a lot easier to move general lines than it is to move specific ideas. So we want to learn that process of breaking things down at the beginning and then building them back up. I have here a glass palette. That's what I'm going to demonstrate with. I set up my station before I start painting. So organization is key to success. So my palette is underneath. More than likely you're going to have a palette table next to you or something like this. It is a good idea to have it this way, so that way the colors and the values are as close as possible to your actual subject, but it's not critical. We could get by doing it on a flat surface, and that's normally how I paint as well, unless I do figure portraits. I have my medium, I have my paper towels, I have my paint, and I have my brushes. The concept is that we are going to use two brushes at the beginning. So what you need to do is to allocate two brushes, and these are old brushes. So I have a number 2 and a number 4 flats. So these are flats, but they are old. I put black tape on the back end of them in order to know that these are the brushes that I'm always going to start with. The reason for that is these brushes take a lot of abuse. So we want to be able to not worry about which brush we're going to pick up because they're already labeled. 1, 2, we don't want to slow our progress down because we don't want to damage these brushes. These brushes are made or used in such a way that we don't care if they get damaged. If they get damaged beyond use, then we just toss them out and we get new ones. So normally these are used brushes, old brushes, but it's important that they're flats. One's a 4 and one's a 2. And I will get into the other brushes when we go over the materials list in class. Secondly, we want to make sure that we have our paint and that we organize our paint accordingly. Right now, you're going to be using burnt umber, and that's it. To draw, we're just using burnt umber. The reason why painters start with burnt umber, it's the fastest drying paint. It's an earth color, therefore it absorbs the oil and also sets up a lot faster. Now, we have to remember that painting has some strict rules to it. The most important one is fat over lean, meaning that the layer underneath has to be drier than the layer on top. If you do not follow this method, your painting will crack over time. I'm going to talk about substrates, I'm going to talk about prepping, I'm going to talk about creating an imprimatura, both burnt umber or a gray mid-tone value number 4 or 5. But that's going to come a little bit later on. Right now we're just interested in the process. So you're going to need to have your master copy. You're going to need to have your plumb line. So we're going to use the plumb line in order to measure. And you're going to need to have your 2 starter brushes. Now the number 2 is the one you're going to use to draw, and the number 4 is going to be the one that you use to erase. So in order to do the fat over lean, what I'm going to have here is a little cup, 2-ounce cup of solvent. which will ensure that my painting is fat over lean. Now, we're going to be using canvas paper, and that's right underneath this image here. I just wanted to show you this image. This is the master copy. This is what the end result would look like. This is the first stage of the painting process, which is the general block-in. We're going to be doing a modified envelope and the general block-in. Okay, class. So we're going to start the site size process. Things to note while you're setting up. So your board needs to be 90-degree angles. Your master copy, if you are right-handed, is on the left side. Your blank copy is on the right side. Make sure to tape it down where the paper doesn't move or bounce. Your palette is set up. You've got your burnt umber. You have your solvent. You have your paper towel. You have your plumb line. So more or less we're ready to go. We're going to be using canvas paper. The reason why I chose that is because it's easy to store. There's not a lot of bulk to it. It does absorb quite a bit. So what I recommend is taking your number 4, which is going to be our eraser, and dipping it in. You're going to dip both in, and this is part of the process. Again, when I go over the materials list, I'll discuss a little bit more about the actual painting process. Right now, we just are going to dip our brushes in to saturate the bristles, and that way they don't stain the bristles as much. 1. 2, because it is paper, it does absorb, so I like to put a base coat on it. That way it's easier to erase, or else you're going to have a hard time erasing. All right, so now that we have it set up, there are a few rules that we have to start with. So the first rule is that we're going to set up the height, the location, and the general shape of our subject. In this case, it's the figure. So placement on the page is very important, especially if the arms are extended out. We want to make sure that we don't run off the canvas. So we have to place it on the page accordingly. So let's get set up so I can walk you guys through it. So, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start, and then I will speed up the process once we get a handle of it. The first thing that I want to do again is dip my brush and then take out the excess, dip my brush. This one will not have paint on it. It's just going to be used as an eraser. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a layer on the canvas. That way it's going to be easier for me to erase. So we're not dealing directly with such a dry surface. Once we have the imprimatura on, that situation will be not as apparent. So, and normally what I do is I will set up my own substrates. So I use masonite and I prime them, which again eliminates some of the issues you have when you're at the mercy of what a manufacturer does, right? Manufacturers are more or less in for the money, not necessarily the quality of it. Okay, so now that I have that, my brush, just gonna put a little bit more solvent. I'm gonna close the top because I don't wanna have those fumes. I've got my brush with paint on it. When you're painting, you wanna make sure that you are not doing this. So right now what we're doing is we're painting from a master copy. So we're quite close to it, although I'm going to be stepping back, so I may be out of the screen part of the time. But in general, you do not want to paint like you're writing. So you want to hold it towards the end. So, and I have these tapes back here which help me also. So I paint this way, okay? And normally what I do is I am about arm's length away, which allows me to use my arm, my shoulder versus my wrist and my digits to paint. All right, so I'm gonna get set up. The first thing I wanna do is get my top line, then I'm gonna get my bottom line, and then I'm going to get an ankle plus. We're always starting with the standing leg, okay? Because it gives us a nice long, more or less straight line One, this is going to be called our truth line. So if you did any of the bar drawings, you started with a Cartesian graph, which was something more or less like this. Okay, so it's the XY axis. So this coastline, the standing leg all the way up to the shoulder, is our Y-axis. Our X-axis is our plumb line. Our plumb line gets all the vertical marks, and our paintbrush will find the angles. Okay, so you need 1 to get to 2. So we need a starting point. So let's do that. When I place my plumb line, and this is very important when you get to doing from a live model, is that you want to register your chin in such a way where it's more or less level. Okay, your painting surface needs to be, the center of your painting needs to be just a little bit higher than shoulder level. So you're painting more up than you are down. The tendency is if you have your drawing board too low, you're going to end up slouching and you're going to distort your painting. So you're either going to elongate or shorten parts of your painting, and we don't want that. So you're going to register your chin by placing your plumb line at the top, and you want to make sure that when you are painting that your arm is fully extended and locked at the elbows, that you stand, and again, this is not so much of an issue when we're dealing with the master copy, but when we're painting from life, you are going to register your canvas to the far left if you are right-handed. Okay, you have to do that because there's a sequence of events that will occur later on which will facilitate us doing certain things when the painting is registered to the left. You will stand half facing your painting, half facing the model. So more or less where the edge of your painting meets the figure is where you're going to be standing. Okay, so more or less I'm standing in the center here. I don't want to extend my arm where it's so wide. I want to create just enough plumb line from the figure to my copy in order to navigate and move freely. I have my paintbrush in my hand, and I want to make sure that the plumb line is plumb, 0 degrees, not at an angle. We are never painting at an angle, at least at this point. Okay, so I have more or less the top. I've registered my chin, and I'm going to keep my eye focused, and I'm going to place that line. I'm going to check for accuracy. It's very important that you check for accuracy. So you can see that that line is a little low. So I'm going to take my brush, it's already got solvent in it, and I'm just going to move that line up a little bit. So, and this is where you can see that the solvent, the canvas paper, sorry, is not allowing me to really erase that the way I want to. So I'm just going to go back in a little bit darker, like so. Again, I'm going to move that up a little bit. Good. Let's see if I can actually take away a little bit of that. Because it's not going away, I'm going to switch for a second and use the painting medium, because I don't want that issue where I have these ghost lines throughout my painting. So I'm going to go ahead and dip in my medium, and I'm going to put a layer of medium on the canvas. So the medium, because you're going to need it in order to do this, is 50% linseed oil, 50% rectified turpentine, and several drops of cobalt oil. The cobalt oil is an accelerator, and that is important and handy because it allows the paint to set up more or less within a day or so and allows us to continue painting. So it will ensure the fat over lean, 1. 2, it gives us more of a dry surface, at least dry to the touch. It's not actually dry because it's a chemical reaction that takes 6 months to years, depending on how thick you paint. All right, so I think that's gonna be okay. And I think that's gonna solve my problem. I'm gonna put the top back on, again, just for safety. And what I do is I have a 4-ounce bottle and a 2-ounce cup. So my painting, I make sure that I mix enough medium to last the entire painting. Okay, so I have a large jar and then I have a travel jar if I need it. Okay, so now I've got my top line. I'm just gonna go back and confirm it. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm gonna go to the bottom. And again, right now it's not as critical that we keep the chin perfectly level. Okay, let's confirm that. And that looks good. I just want to, that's too bad. Hold on. Okay, so I have my top line, my bottom line, more or less I have where the figure is going to be. I'm always gonna register with the top line, so that's gonna allocate my chin. And then I'm gonna drag it down to the top side of the ankle of the outer leg. And more or less I have something right here. I'm gonna confirm for accuracy. So I'm gonna place my plumb line at the top, drag it down, make sure that it is parallel, needs to raise up just a little bit. Notice I didn't erase the mistake. I painted in the correct one, and then I'm going to erase the mistake. And even with the medium, it's still a ghost image. We're just gonna have to deal with it. Okay, I'm gonna check for accuracy. Again, using my plumb line, starting at the top. Okay, so that looks good. I am gonna place a plus sign here. Okay, looks good. Just wanna thin that out a little bit. So my brush is quite old and the lines are getting a little bit thick, so I just have to, this brush is on its last leg. Okay, so the reason I need that plus sign is I need a starting point. Now that I have the plus sign, I'm gonna go ahead and find the next marker. So in this case, it's rounded off, but I'm going to go ahead and go up to this section here, more or less. So again, I'm gonna start at the top, go to this marker here. Actually, I'm gonna go to here. So on your copy, it's simplified a little bit more. So it's telling me that it's here. I'm gonna go back, check for accuracy. Okay, that looks good. Then I'm gonna place my paintbrush against the top of the ankle and this one here. It's gonna give me the projection, and then I connect the two. It is very important that you connect the two. I'm gonna thin out that line because I wanna create a nice thin aesthetic. Okay. And don't worry if it's not perfect. The idea is you'll get better over time. 1, 2, that you will create a neutral base coat or block in. That's the idea. So, and in the break I may change brushes because this one's flaring out and give me some big lines. Okay, so I've got the first 2 lines. Remember, coordinate A, coordinate B. So once you have those 2, you need to connect them. I don't want to see dots all over this here because it gets confusing. Each part of this process should get you closer to looking like the end result. All right, I'm gonna move a little bit faster now. So from here, I'm going here, making sure that my plumb line is 0 degrees, and that looks good. Keep my eye focused. I'm going to draw this line. I'm gonna exaggerate and extend a little bit more. That way, when I go to actually connect, I have, okay, so it's good, the registration. Now I'm gonna go from here to here. I'm gonna find that angle. I'm gonna drag it over. Wherever it intersects that line is the answer. So the answer is here. I'm gonna go back and just confirm that is true, and it is. Once I've got accuracy confirmed, then I'm going to connect the two again. Like so. I'm going to clean up that line, so I'm just going to thin it out a little bit. So notice how I am thinning out that line. So I'm just doing these brush strokes. So it's as if I'm using an eraser and just thinning it out. So again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you want to create something that is consistent. Okay, so now I'm up to here, so I'm going to go ahead and register the next one and slowly move my way up, all the way up to the shoulder. Okay, making sure my plumb line is level. That looks good. I'm going to extend this line to so. I'm going to check for accuracy. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to close my one eye. I'm going to place my paintbrush on the master, drag it over. Wherever it intersects is the answer. I'm going to go back, check that again, transfer it over. That looks good, and draw that line. Like so. I'm going to thin out that line just a little bit. And I'm actually going to reduce the intensity of the guideline, because at the end of the day, I don't want all these lines flaring out and disrupting what I'm looking at. Okay, so I'm going to keep moving. By and large, when I do a coordinate, 3 seconds to place it up at the top, drag it down. Another 3 seconds to find that registration, mark, and move on. So I just want to make sure I don't have paint. Then I'm going to check for accuracy, drag it down, looks good. Then I'm going to check the angle, and place the line. And then keep going. So more or less 12 seconds or so. So I'm going to go back here. I didn't check for accuracy, so I'm just going to double check and make sure. Okay, that looks good. So moving up to the next one. Like so. And I think that angle might be off just a little bit. Yeah. So this angle needs to move in a little bit more. So my teacher used to tell me 80% of drawing is erasing. So mistakes are opportunities. So don't think of them as slowing your progress. You're becoming more aware of what you're looking at. Okay, good. So once I have that, I'm going to go ahead and place that line. Needs to be more of a vertical, like so. Gonna clean it up. And again, once we start working with panels and an imprimatura, your lines are going to be much cleaner. Okay, this is a nice long one, so that's a good one. Normally, again, the master copy that you're going to get, the first one is simplified a lot more than this one here. Okay, making sure my line is plumb. I'm going to extend this line out like so. I'm going to check for accuracy. Okay, good. I'm going to place my plumb line, my paintbrush on that line, drag it over. Wherever it intersects is the answer. I'm going to go back and check to make sure that it is correct. That looks good. Then I'm going to connect the two lines. Okay, you can see that I wobbled a little bit. I'm just going to push that in just a hair. So everything is considered a variable truth, not an absolute truth. So what we have here, we could say is perfect. But the more information we put down, the more we have to challenge, the more all the information needs to add up. So we have to be flexible. It might be perfect right now, but once we get all the information, we may have to tweak, move a little bit. So we have to be flexible and not married to any one thing. ankle or the feet, the model stand has got tape around the feet. So the model's always going to go back in that spot. 1, 2, it's the least affected by gravity. So some of the old methods are starting with the heads and counting and things like that. The reason why sight size and cross triangulation is so effective is that you're dealing with mathematics in general, but you're doing it with sight size and cross triangulation with the right side of your brain, which is more artistic, versus the left side. When you're counting heads, you're 100% into the mathematics of things. So this allows us to navigate and to clearly create accurate information without being, how should I say, without being so focused on the mathematics, right? We're finding angles, we're finding heights, but we're not calculating and measuring per se. Okay, I've got my truth line now established. So now I want to create the width. So our goal is height to width relationship, okay, when we're doing this block-in stage. So we have now our height. We want to make sure that the width, so the hip is more or less the halfway mark, so we're going to use that there. So I'm going to pick up right underneath the belly button, more or less, where the anterior superior iliac crest is going to be. So more or less it's here. And I'm going to go ahead and create that marker. So I'm going to check and make sure. Okay, that looks good. Then I'm going to literally measure. So this is where sight size is critical. So in this case here, I'm measuring horizontal, never at an angle. So the temptation is to use this coordinate here. I am not going to do that, because the reason behind that is that, you know, if that angle is not in the right place, then we have a problem. Okay, so it's telling me it's more or less here. I just want to confirm that. Okay, we're going to continue now. Make sure that you check for accuracy. So once you have the leg where you have height to width relationship, that you check in a few places to make sure that everything is adding up. You can also see why it's so important to do figure drawing first, because you're setting up the process. So instead of doing it with a pencil, we're just doing it with a brush, but it's exactly the same process. All right, so I'm going to continue working, and I'll just speed up the video. That way you guys won't have to watch this for an hour or so. All right, very good. Okay, so I'm starting the other leg, and what I want to do is more or less, I'm going to start where the Achilles heel is, because I have this ankle here, but I'm going to measure it from the outside ankle of the right leg. The reason for that is I want to make sure that I am accurate. Long distances are more likely to be accurate than really short ones. So because I know that, I'm going to go ahead and capitalize on that information. And then this is the end of the sentence. So I want to start both markers because I want to keep going in both directions. They have to meet up. If I start here, the probability of me ending up where I should end up gets reduced. So by having a starting point and an ending point, I'm more likely to make them meet together. So, and I don't know why that is, but through experience, that's what I've discovered. So I find it to be much better to have starting point, ending point. Now, when I get to this part here, so what I want to do is height to width relationship. So I'm going to check and make sure that the height is correct. 0 degrees, good. And then I'm going to measure it from the master copy all the way to the outer right leg. And that's going to give me the answer. Then I'm going to see if the projection is correct. And in this case, okay, so at this point, I'm going to introduce the mall stick. So I'm starting to get into smaller lines. The mall stick allows me to create nice, clean lines because it supports my hand. So on the next one, I'm going to show you guys how to use that. I'm not going to spend much time with the ankle. Sorry, not the ankle, the foot, because there's a lot of information there. The thing to note is that from the ankle to the big toe, we have a projection. That's considered the side plane. This is considered the top plane. The big knuckle, there's a slight change in direction of the foot. So we want to note that. But again, I would do that after I get the rest of the foot established. Because you don't want to spend a lot of time in any one place, especially where there's a lot of detail and things like that, because that takes too much time. We want to close up the entire figure. It's better to do this here, and then we can work on refining that information. But more or less, this is considered the side plane, and that's considered the top plane. And I'm standing close to this image, and I have been for more or less the entire time. You would not do that. You know, every 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes maximum, you would step back and judge. This needs to look like that. Each stage should make this closer and closer to this product here. So if that's not the case, you need to evaluate, just like what I did here. It started looking like there wasn't enough real estate, enough height to one part of the painting. So better to adjust this now and not at the final stage. I'm also going to go ahead and start playing or mapping out the center line. So from lower pelvic to belly button, we have a projection that is more or less something like this. I want to make sure that that is the correct real estate. That looks good. And then I want to create that projection line. And then from the pelvic, looks like there's two shifts. There's one going towards the rib cage. And then there's one going towards the clavicle. Okay, class, so I went ahead and closed up the block in. So this is the first pass. So the second pass would be to go ahead and to refine things. For instance, the angle of this line is a little bit too hard, so I would soften that up. The angle here looks pretty good, although the length may be a little bit longer. than what I have. No, it looks like it's good. So I would go around and look negative space, is it all adding up? But this is basically the block-in stage. You would want to, again, make sure that the width to height relationships all work. So, you know, ideally you check as you go and, you know, there aren't any mistakes at the end, but of course we're a human, so there probably will be a few mistakes here and there. So refining that information is going to be essential.